My talk today is about driving revenue by getting data outside your company. And many of you will probably have been asked this at some point, which is, we have all of this data. Shouldn't there be a way to make some money from it? And executives love asking this question. And for this talk today, my goal is to give you a roadmap from this question to a shipped revenue-generating data product. For anybody here who has been through that journey before, I hope that you'll learn 2 or 3 different lessons that might help you avoid some of the pain that you've experienced while doing this. And for everyone else, now if anybody ever asks you this question, you are completely prepared and ready with what to do. All right, so why listen to me? I've spent a lot of time doing this. So I've worked as a consultant inside Fortune 50, 100 companies, taking ideas that are data ideas and then bringing them to market. I've owned the P&L of a $100 million data business at Nielsen. I was the VP of data at a unicorn startup where our core products were data products that we were offering. And then I'm currently the founder and CEO of Delivery Layer, which is a SaaS application that powers customer-facing data products. And so I spend most of my time nowadays answering this question and helping companies answer this question for themselves. And importantly, my goal here is not just to tell you the answer. My goal is to have you get some new mindsets and insights that can help you as you do this inside of your organizations. Because there's no one answer that works everywhere, but there are some universal truths and mindsets that will help you as you go and attack this problem for yourselves. All right, so the agenda for today, step number 1, should you even do this? Is this going to be a total disaster if you try to go start selling your data? Number 2, if yes, then how should you start? Who wants to buy your data, right? Who do you sell it to? Number 3, we'll cover ideation. How do you take your data and turn it into a bunch of potential things that people will buy? Number 4 is validation. How do you make sure that those ideas are good ideas and won't blow up in your face? Next, we'll talk about build. What are some of the key things you need to keep in mind as you're actually building these products? And then lastly, we'll cover some tips on launching. Once you're actually heading out to market, what are the important things to know? So step number 1, should you even do this? So here's why business people get really excited about selling data and commercializing data. So step number 1 is you already have the data. It's kind of just sitting there, right? It's an asset that might be useful. Because it's just sitting there, it generally has extremely high margins, which means that it doesn't cost you much to drive the revenue that's going to come in from it. And then the third piece is that most data products are recurring revenue. And so not just will someone buy it once and then never use it again, for whatever reason they're using it, that reason is going to continue over and over and over year after year after year. And if you're noticing something here, these characteristics are very similar to the things that make SaaS businesses so valuable. So in the same way that you could have 2 businesses that both have the same amount of revenue, one might be valued at 1x that revenue, the other could be valued at 5, 10x that revenue. It's because of these types of characteristics. And in fact, many people, when they talk about these types of data businesses, there's sort of a category called DaaS, which is data as a service. It's got many of the same positive characteristics as SaaS businesses, particularly around valuation. So that's why business people really like this. Now here's why data teams might get pretty excited about selling data. Number 1, it's revenue generating impact for the data team. So every data team is out there trying to justify their existence. We had a talk earlier on cost control, but wouldn't it be nice if you could point to revenue and say, not just are we being good stewards of the money on the cost side, but we're actually driving revenue, and here's the money that we can point to. And there's an interesting next step on this, which is it doesn't take that much for the data team to pay for itself. So if you think about most companies, the revenue, the expenses that you will typically pay for a data team will be what? Somewhere between 2 and 5% at any company. Outside of that is very rare. So what that means is that you as a data leader, can you drive, or a data team member, can you drive somewhere between 2 and 5% incremental of revenue to your company? If so, you've just totally paid for your team. And the next time someone ever asks the question of, are we really getting any value from this data team, the answer is just so obvious, they more than pay for themselves, right? So that's why a data team leader would get excited about it. Now here's some internal strategic reasons to not sell your data, and there's 2 primary ones, right? Forgetting whether the market wants your data or not, here's just internal strategy reasons why you might not want to sell your data. So number 1 is loss of focus. If you've got some major things that your business needs to do, it might be a distraction to try to start a data business. Most businesses are in some sort of cyclical path of either needing to do more things and expand or needing to do less things and focus, right? Depending on where you are in that cycle, it might make more sense to go try to start some sort of revenue-generating data product, or it might not. And then the second reason is loss of trust. Many businesses that have data aren't able to use that data for things, even if those things could drive revenue, because of trust expectations with how that data ended up in your company. You'll know the answer to what you can or can't use data for in your company, but you should be careful not to destroy the whole company because you only have one reputation, and ruining that reputation is not a good strategic move, even if it might get you a little bit of revenue in the short run. All right, and mindset number 1, sort of way of thinking about this in general that you can take with you, is that starting a data business is really just starting a business. It's got most of the same characteristics as any other business. There are some specific things that we're going to talk through in this presentation that do make it different, that you need to specifically watch out for data, but the core things are always the same. It is a business, in the same way that any other business is a business. And so when we think about that next step, so the internal reasons, you're good to go. Your company wants to launch new things. They want to drive more revenue. Everybody's excited about it. So how do you start selling your data? Who do you sell it to? And already, unfortunately, we've come across a big red flag that relates to any business that you're trying to start. Because even the question of, we've got data, who do we sell it to, is a solution looking for a problem, right? Nobody cares about your internal company desire to sell them something, right? So the real question is not, who do we sell our data to, or how do we sell our data? The better question to ask is, who needs to buy your data? What are the problems out there that you are trying to solve with your data, or what are the problems out there that people in the market are trying to solve, and how does your data fit into that? And so I'm going to cover 3 different buyer types very quickly, just to give people a sense of the market and how to think about this. I'm going to talk about hedge funds, your industry, and your customers, and somehow the formatting between slides and PowerPoint disaligned those. All right, so first, hedge funds. Everybody loves thinking that hedge funds are going to just go and buy your data for a ridiculously large amount of money, and it's going to be a super easy process. And that's generally not what happens. So what hedge funds want, no surprise, they want to make money by trading off of insights that they're able to pull from your data. There are actually some really good things about working or trying to sell your data to hedge funds, because it's a very straightforward process. You take your data, you take it up till about 6 months ago, and then you send it to them in raw form, and they just go into a hole and they work on it for somewhere between weeks and months, depending on their internal resources. And then they just come back to you and say, we want it or we don't. And they don't tell you what they found. They don't tell you anything. The more they like it, the more they won't tell you anything, right? That's the thing. They don't want anybody to know that they like it, because the hedge fund industry is all about secrecy. The cons, so all of that is good. The cons of of selling to hedge funds are that it is a much smaller universe than most people expect. There's really probably only 50 hedge funds out there that spend significant amounts of money on data, and every single person with every single data set across the entire world all tries to sell to those same 50 hedge funds. And the ticket prices on hedge fund purchases of data are substantially smaller than most people expect. A lot of people go in thinking they're going to get $2 million for their data, and then they come back with an offer of $50,000, right? There's step change differences between expectations and reality in this market oftentimes. And most data sets are not a good fit unless they can broadly predict things about the market. In general, it's probably not the best place to start with hedge funds. The next set of buyers are people in your industry. And so people in your industry will oftentimes be interested in things like insights products, market intelligence products, benchmarking products, share of voice. They're trying to get insights about their business. And if you understand certain slices of that business, you can build a customer-facing data product with those insights. The pros are that you probably understand what they need pretty well because you're in that industry. And the other pro is that they're probably the biggest market opportunity, right? It's essentially your customers plus everybody else who's not your customers that is the opportunity there for this product. The cons are that you can no longer send them raw data. They don't just need a raw data feed that they're going to work on. They need you to actually get that data into usable form. And then many data sets are not a good fit unless you can make wide-ranging predictions. And then lastly, depending on your business and how you get it, it's a very sales-led go-to-market motion. So if you're not ready for that, you have to spin up potentially a new way of going out and selling. Overall, it's a generally good first partner archetype, but the best partner archetype is really your customers. So your customers have the benefit of having all of the same desires as the people in your industry, plus you've got this opportunity to build specific products that are built for them based on whatever data they're sending you, either just aggregating that and sending it back to them or pulling in new data and doing things with it and then selling that back to them. The pros are you have a great existing relationship with them. You've got the biggest potential set of products to sell them. And they're also generally very happy to help you with product development as a design partner. They're already paying you money. If you can solve more problems with them, they will pay you more money. The cons are that the data often needs a lot of work. There's a massive amount of hand-holding that you're going to need to do with them over the course of the product development lifecycle. And then also, while it is easier to sell them, there's an expectation sometimes that you just throw in everything you do to them for free. And sometimes it's more difficult to get them to pay as opposed to somebody that you don't have a relationship with, that the expectation is obviously that they're going to pay. But in general, they're the best first partner, and you should really, instead of thinking about broadly, who do I sell my data to, you should be starting with your customers. The next stage here is ideation. So you've got this data, like what is it that you're selling? So if data is like oil, then similar to oil, data needs to be refined in order to turn into something useful. And it is turned into countless useful things, right? My glasses are made of plastic from oil. This clicker is made of plastic from oil. My shoes have plastic from oil, right? So just selling your data, are you selling glasses or a clicker or shoes? Those are products, right? So I've got two mindsets here. One is about the types of ideas that you should be thinking about, and the other is the process. So on the types of ideas, insights are generally more valuable than raw data. And if you think about it, it should be no surprise, because if you're selling raw data, when you send it to someone, their actual purchase price is the cost of the data plus the cost of their internal team that's going to change that data into something actually useful for their business. And so when you internally do all of that work for your industry, you're providing more commercial value and you're able to capture more of it. Those products that you're able to offer are just more valuable. From a process perspective, and mindset number 3 to keep in mind through this whole product development journey is that you are the conductor, not the orchestra. You cannot do all the work yourself. If you expect that as a data team leader or as an individual data team member that you're just going to go on and like will a data product into existence on your own, it's going to be a total disaster. Really what you should be doing is coordinating all of the different pieces that are going to be required to bring it to market. So for ideation, you start by getting everything on paper with both internal and external folks. So internal, you've got your data team members, your execs, your salespeople, your product people, your customer support people, whoever has good ideas of what to do with your data, you want to get them involved. And then also you want to look externally to customers and industry leaders and talk to people at conferences like this and figure out actually what are you going to sell. And in particular, this is what an idea looks like. So an idea has these specific characteristics. If it doesn't have these things, it's not really a relevant idea for something you could go build. So it's got to have a customer, and you need to be as specific as possible. You're not selling to an oil company. You're selling to the VP of M&A at oil companies that are currently in the market trying to buy new oil companies, right? Those are very different customers, and you need to be specific as possible about who's actually buying it. You need to talk about their problem and the cost of the problem, right? How big is the problem that your data is going to actually solve for them? If this is a big problem or a small problem, it makes a big difference. You need to talk about the current solution. If this is a big enough problem, they're solving it somehow, right? They're investing to solve it. It's probably not a great solution, and that's where the opportunity is. And then lastly, you need to understand your solution, what's your idea, and how would it solve the problem. I've got some good processes to actually go through and get ideas on paper. So I'll go through them quickly. Number one is brainwriting. Brainwriting is a strictly better form of brainstorming. I don't know if anybody's ever sat in a room and tried to pull ideas out of people, but it's a brutal process. Brainwriting is where you have everybody around write down on sticky notes for 10 or 15 minutes all of their ideas on how to do something for a problem, and then everybody goes up to a whiteboard and sticks their sticky notes on the whiteboard, and you group them, and then you talk about the ideas. And this avoids a single loud person dominating a big meeting. It avoids the highest paid person in the room just being the only person who has a point of view. This gets everybody's ideas out there quickly. For external folks, for customers, you're going to do a lot of one-on-one meetings. Just talk to them. They'll tell you their problems and what they want to do with data. There's an entire field on these types of questions and how to run workshops, et cetera, called design thinking. If you want to dive deep into it, go Google it and find some things. All right, so at the end of this, you'll have a whole bunch of ideas, and then you need to filter for the good ones. Most of the ideas are bad. That's totally fine. You're supposed to come up with a lot of bad ideas, and then you go and filter for the good ones. Some people try to be scientific about the way that they filter for good ideas. I don't think that that works. I think it should be very clear to you, if you've come up with 20 ideas, there are 2 or 3 that are worthwhile, and there are 17 that are probably not so good. Everybody should be broadly aligned on the things that are exciting. If you have someone who's like really excited about a certain idea, let them run with it, because we're going to get to the next stage where you figure out if it's actually a good idea or not. And then at this point, you should check in, because very possibly all of the excitement about broadly selling your data, I'm going to sell my data, maybe now that you have, okay, selling my data could be this problem to this customer for around this price with this solution, maybe when you list the 2 or 3 things, it's not that compelling anymore, and you just drop it. And better to drop it at that point than to drop it later when you found that it is not exciting to the market versus just not exciting to you personally. All right. And assuming you get the green light and we go ahead, the next step is validation. And we're going to do a little exercise in just a second on validation. The most important piece of validation is to actively search for where you have wrong assumptions. So I'm going to ask for some audience participation here. If anybody has an older relative that they care deeply about, or had an older relative that they care deeply about, can they raise their hand? Everybody. Older relative. Okay. If anybody, keep your hand up. Keep your hand up for a second, anybody. If anybody feels like it would be super nice if that older relative wrote down or recorded some stories to sort of pass on, keep your hand raised. Anybody who thinks it wouldn't be nice, put their hand down. All right. And if anybody has spent even $50 over the course of their lifetime making that a reality, then keep your hand up. If not, put it down. All right. So most people's hands started up, and at the end, we have very few people with their hands up. And this is the key for validation in business in general, but particularly for data products. So I started this business 13 years ago. It's called Memoir Place. I talked to many people. Almost everybody was very excited this is when the Twilio APIs came out. Funny enough, we had a speaker who was in Twilio earlier. And the idea was you could have a phone conversation with a relative. It could get transcribed and recorded on the back end, and it would be this cool thing that you could pass down. And almost everybody thought it was a great idea, and it sounded nice, and nobody really paid for it. And so the business crashed and burned. And so this gives us mindset number 5 for data product development, which is everybody will say that they want data. The big question to validate is whether or not they're going to pay for it. Because, again, literally everybody will always say they want it, and then when push comes to shove, they might not pay for it. So you've got to get really in the trenches with assumption-based validation. You've got to understand what are the key things that actually make this something that I think someone's going to pay for. I think the problem is worth $1 million a year to this company, right? And so when I sit down and talk to them, like, do they agree? How much do they think the problem is worth? Is $1 million problem something that is important enough for them to focus resources on fixing? Like many businesses, if Apple had $1 million problem, they would just laugh you out of the room if you tried to solve it. It's not a strategic enough problem for certain businesses to solve. You need to understand very specifically what are all of the assumptions that need to be true, and you need to try to see if they're not true. All right, next, we're talking about build. So the key thing for building these products, everybody's heard of MVP, and it started out great because back in the day, everybody used to build these way over-engineered things that ended up not being what the market wanted, and it would have been much better to just build something simpler. But at this point, MVPs sometimes can be a little bit too minimal and not viable enough. So I want to define what is viable and what does product look like for data products. And the answer is you need to build something that people will buy now. That's the answer if they're not ready to buy it. Because there's no like early-ish users and later users for data products that the data passes the test of being useful and valuable or it doesn't, right? And then lastly, on a building side of things, you need to have a product with a vision for the future. So I've seen many people build POCs that no longer scale beyond 2 customers for these customer-facing data products. They get really funky. So that's the mindset that's really important to keep in mind for these types of products. If you're building on modeled data, be ready for challenges. It's like next level difficult to sell modeled data to customers. In fact, this is probably a whole other talk, so I'm not going to dig too deep. But like on the sales and onboarding and customer success side, just be ready to invest significantly more if you're selling modeled data. Most of the data systems that you're building for a data product are actually data delivery because you generally have most of the data on the shelf already, right? Not always, but oftentimes. So there are only 5 ways that data really ever leaves your company. In a web application, either one you already have to your existing customers if it fits, or in a new one if it doesn't. An API, a data file, an email where you've got like a PowerPoint presentation or an Excel file that goes out. And then lastly, you've got a database-to-database direct connection. Just for some context, this is where delivery layer sits. It's sort of a web application platform with APIs. We're building out the data files and email, and the whole idea is that you've got unified permissions, account management, authentication, and all of the tools to be able to build these very quickly, as opposed to hiring a dev team and having them build this out for enterprise functionality over 2 years. Now, you should be able to tell what kind of data business you have. You'll know whether people want more of the raw data. You'll know whether it fits inside your web application. It should be generally obvious as you're building like where the key customer archetypes are and what they're going to want from a delivery mechanism. The one thing I would keep in mind is that once you get to 100 customers, your customers are going to kind of want a little bit of everything. So as much as you might think this is a dashboard product, oftentimes your biggest customers will say, okay, the dashboard is great, and we also need your data via an API. And the opposite side, you might have an API or data feed first product, and then suddenly an executive at your biggest customer starts to want a dashboard. So that's something you need to keep in mind as you build these. You need to every single data business, this always happens. And so when you're starting one, you should already know this is going to happen. And then lastly, we've got a couple of different mindsets for as you're launching this, things to keep in mind. So number one is that overwhelmingly data is sold, not bought. And so you need to be very aligned with sales. Most business users or most data people at companies don't go out trying to source third-party data sets to solve problems. It can happen, but almost never. So as you're thinking about these, you should be ready to sell and be very aligned with sales, because what sales pitches is what your customers are going to expect from the data. And if you're not ready for that as a data person, or rather, you need to be ready for that as a data person, and you need to work closely with them to make sure that they aren't promising things that are completely impossible. And whoever has done this is probably cringing. I see a couple smiles in the audience. All right, mindset number 8. The bar for data quality and reliability is substantially higher for an external-facing data product. It's very different when your head of marketing says on Monday, hey, this dashboard seems a little off, versus you got 100 customers calling you up saying, what's wrong? Why is this not working? Why does it say my data is wrong? And it's sort of higher stakes when it's external. I'll give you a story on this. At one time, I was responsible for the systems that generated the Billboard charts. So which musicians had the top single that week, the top album that week. And let me tell you, like, people's jobs are on the line with that. The heads of studios or the heads of the distribution companies will get bonuses or get fired depending on who's at the top of the charts. And you can only imagine the pressure and the stress for if they think that the data quality is off, right? They don't just get mad, they sue you. Like, it's very serious for them. And so when you're thinking about building data products, you really have to be strongly considering your data reliability. Mindset number 9, like any business, it's going to take time and have problems. Figuring out how to use data is not something that automatically happens, even if you've got the executives aligned and you've got some champions in a business who understand how this data that you're selling is going to make a big difference. You still need to do a lot of hand-holding with people outside of your organization who don't understand your data as well to actually make sure they're getting value out of it. I've had customers that for months we were working with them to make sure they were getting value from the data, and it makes things better, so do whatever you need to do at the beginning. That's just the reality of any business, not just data businesses, but be ready for a lot of hand-holding on how to use this data at the beginning. And then lastly, final mindset, there are real benefits to getting data team members in the market, both for data team members and for the rest of the business in the way that they see the data people. Like whatever mental model that you have of how your business works and how your data is valuable, getting that and pitting it in a sales situation up against your customers and how they see the world is extremely valuable learning. And as a data person, the more time you could spend with customers in general, the better. But in particular, if you're trying to sell them something, it really gets serious in terms of where you're accurate and where you're not accurate about the value of what you're doing and how important it is in the market. And on the other side, I have seen many examples of of business people and executives be very surprised when the data people who they didn't think had it in them would go into a meeting with customers and just blow the customers away with the depth of their knowledge about the industry and trends and the business and why this data was important. And so there are real benefits to doing it. That is it. Good luck to everybody who wants to embark on this journey. I've got time for some, well, I don't know how much time I have, Carlos, with questions, but if you find me anytime, everybody can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for Solomon Kahn. And thank you very much.